Okay, so the thing I wanted to do today, either now or on lunch break, and I think we'll just do it now, is I was gonna watch this video because I was here yesterday. I was building my deck for locals today, and I was watching some YouTube videos in the background, and I started watching this one for like a minute or two, and then I realized, like, hold on a second, this is an interesting topic. Let's just watch it on stream. So I stopped watching it yesterday, and we can take a look at it today. And the video is titled "Consistency is Ruining TCG Metagames," which I think is an interesting video for me in particular to watch, because this is like the opposite of what I feel like about consistency, right? This is like the and I am intrigued or interested in what the points here are, because I think this is a very interesting discussion of, like, is consistency a good or a bad thing, and where do you land on it? So I was going to watch this LC video on stream today anyways, and while we're waiting for the Master Duel maintenance, we might as well watch it. So the cool thing is also, I was talking to LC recently, and we wanted to record a video together. We haven't done so yet. We just haven't found like I think we're both bad at organizing stuff like that, so we haven't made it happen yet, but we will make it happen. Because we've tried to find a day to do it on, or find a topic, and we just haven't managed to do so yet. But it is something I absolutely still want to do, so we probably will at some point. Because you guys know I love talking about TCGs, and Elsie loves talking about TCGs, so we'll have a good time, I think. Anyways, consistency is killer. Let's hear some arguments against consistency, I suppose, and then I will try to defend it. Where I deem it necessary. We are gonna watch it at 1.3 speed because it is a long video, and I would like to go and play some Master Duel on the update day, so we're gonna speed it up just a little bit. All right.
Game designers today have to walk a delicate tightrope. In order to keep players engaged in their trading card games, they need to provide them repeatable experiences where players feel engaged and as though they get to make meaningful choices in every game. However, a recent trend in trading card game design is that the consistency tools that game designers are leaning towards in terms of their designs of systems and of individual cards have led to really negative metagame states for a variety of reasons. I wanted to talk about why this happens, what the different consistency issues are, and why they're causing all of these problems in various different metagames.
Right, and this is my first question, and this is one of the reasons why, like, it was around this time that I decided, you know, let's watch this on stream, because I'm wondering, like, are we really gonna talk about? Because for me, at least, it feels like the consistency is the thing that shows you the problem, right? Like, I think consistency is the thing that points you to a problem, is how I personally feel like it, at least in Yu-Gi-Oh, is like, if something, consistency is a good thing because everyone wants to be able to play the game. But if something, if what's happening consistently is bad or too strong or whatever, then that thing is the problem, right? I am looking at it from a very Yu-Gi-Oh coded perspective, and I know Elsie talks about a lot of different games, so I'm also interested to hear comparisons to other games, like that. But that's how I feel about it in Yu-Gi-Oh. But yeah.
There are a myriad, actually, of reasons why consistency tools might cause issues in a trading card game. And it's not just as simple as you have too many copies of a similar card. There are a lot of layered issues sometimes that go into it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to go through a couple of examples of either current or recent metagames where consistency problems have led to an overall relatively negative and I would say largely unfun metagame state for players. And then we'll talk about why this tension is hard to resolve for game designers. I'll talk about what aspirationally I think consistency should look like in trading card games, what the actual aspirational target for that might be. And then lastly, I'll talk about some tools.
I have a lot of things I want to say, but I don't want to start the video by talking about consistency for 10 minutes. I want to say the things where they make sense in the video. So we'll get to consistency in Yu-Gi-Oh, I'm sure, at some point. So I'll save it for that.
A bit more aggressively in various trading card games in order to achieve.
The maintenance just extended for another hour. Oh yeah, perfect. Look, I think we're gonna have no problem with that, because this might take this long anyways, because we're yapping about game design and Yu-Gi-Oh card design right now. So we will be able to bridge it probably.
These goals and create more dynamic and interesting.
I was suspecting that earlier already, because the maintenance was not supposed to go this long already, and I was logging into the game earlier, and it was having massive server problems. So I feel like it's something that they might need some time to fix. Yeah, we'll see.
Games while still allowing players to feel engaged and as though their deck consistently does the same thing every time. So let's start things off by talking about the first really kind of problematic metagame, and this is the current Star Wars Unlimited metagame. Star Wars Unlimited right now is in a brand new metagame.
So Star Wars Unlimited, I don't know a lot of. I've never played it. I know that some people are very fond of it. My first ever quote-unquote explanation of it was actually at the recent Riftbound invitational that I was invited to, where there was also a Star Wars player, and I was talking to different people at that event about their respective games, and the Star Wars player explained a few things about Star Wars to me because I was interested in how that game worked. So all I know is that they do like I think they have 40 card decks, and they draw 2 cards per turn. They draw 2 cards per turn, and they they put one of their cards as a resource, like as a mana every turn. So, but they do see 2 cards per turn, which I think that means the decks are very consistent in it because they draw 2 cards per turn.
State, the newest set Ashes just came out, and the Galactic Championship happened only 2 weekends ago at time of recording. Unfortunately, at that tournament, it became really clear that the Cad Bane blue deck was oppressively more powerful than.
It's always interesting to me to see a card from another card game that I have no idea how it works and figure out why it's broken. Overwhelm. When attacking an enemy unit, deal excess damage to the opponent's base. Okay, so that is piercing battle damage. Let's go. On attack, you may deal 1 damage to a unit with 2 or more remaining HP. Okay, what's interesting to me is that it's not the card itself that's providing any sort of consistency here, right? Like we are not, this is not like card draw or searching power or anything like that. I guess maybe it's just got access to powerful consistency tools.
Anything else you can be doing in the format. It put 3 pilots into the top 8. It won the tournament. There were many more in and around the top 64 of this event. And when people thought maybe because the deck had become more known that perhaps it would be more targetable, that in fact did not happen. On following weekends at PQs and other large.
This is a leader, so it's like always accessible. Okay, yeah, I mean, I see. So this is like the kind of the Riftbound thing as well, where, or like One Piece, where you just start with this specific card in play.
Tournaments, Cad Bane Blue has continued to be extremely oppressive in the metagame, to the point where there are calls for emergency bans or changes to be made right away. But how do we get here? What's the actual problem with Cad Bane Blue? There are a bunch of different theories out there and a bunch of different, I think, notions about what the problems are, but I'm going to sum up some of the most important ones and why they trace back to this idea of consistency. Number 1, Cad Bane Blue is leveraging a couple of extremely powerful late game tools that come in on the 8th turn of the game. Or, well, sorry, on the 7th turn of the game with 8 resources. Now, this is important because of the way in which Star Wars Unlimited's resource system works. In Star Wars Unlimited, you can resource a card every turn. You draw 2 cards a turn as well. So what this means is that by turn 7, because you start with 2 resources in play, by turn 7, you are able to finally start playing these 8 drops. The 8 drops that I'm talking about are Pre-Vizsla and Ninth Sister. These are the 2 ones at 8. And then at 7, sorry, Ninth Sister's at 7, Pre-Vizsla's at 8. Yes. Sorry. And then there's also Chimera, A Frightening Reality, which is also on 7. And so on turns 6 and 7, you are able to start deploying these really
Don't do it, chat. Don't do it.
Powerful late game tools that take over the game. And the problem is twofold. Number 1, in Star Wars Unlimited, the resource system, the resources in return, the drawing 2 cards, means that by turn 7, you have seen 18 cards in your deck. The 6 from your opening hand, and then you've drawn 12 more across the 6 draw steps that you've had on the turns, not including turn 1 leading up to this. If you plug that into a hypergeometric calculator, and you assume that you need to find 1 of these powerful 7 or 8 drops in order to be able to swing back the board, which is what all of these cards do. They come down, they're large bodies, and they remove either a bunch of units or 1 unit from your opponent's side of the field. You are over 90% to have one of these tools on turn 8.
So, yeah, interesting. But I feel like, and this is where I'm gonna play devil's advocate here, I guess, and be the one defending consistency, because to me it feels like this is a design choice for Star Wars Unlimited because of the draw 2 cards per turn system. You will just see a majority of your deck very consistently. There's like no way to prevent this if you make the game this way, right? Like a 40 card deck or 50 card deck rather. Here it says 50 population size, so I assume the deck size is 50. If we just draw 2 cards per turn over a game that takes multiple turns to finish, we will see very consistently certain copies of the cards of the decks that we are putting into our decks. To me, this is something I feel like it's, if the problem is, so if every time one of these 2 cards comes down on curve, they win you the game, or they swing around the game state in a very, very easy way, I feel like it's very obviously these 2 cards in particular that are too strong, is how I would look at it from an outside perspective. If like, because here's the thing, right? What's the solution is not the solution is not to lower the consistency, right? Because how does it improve your game experience if these things only happen sometimes, right? Like how is it better if, let's say the numbers were different, right? Let's say the numbers were where the numbers, hold up, let me see, where were we with the numbers? Can't find it.
Are basically always there. There are very few is deck that is directly with Chimera be able to swing back the board, which is what all these cards do. They come down, they're large bodies, and they remove these 2 cards.
Here, how would this be different if the chance was 80% or 70% or whatever, right? Like, would it feel better? Would it feel more fun if these cards were being played? Like, I don't know Star Wars Unlimited enough to say if these cards are broken or not. I can't evaluate them. From what I'm hearing though is like, we're saying the fact that these cards come down on turn 7 and turn 8 so consistently is a problem, because whenever they do come down, they swing the board in such a way. And it's like, well, I feel like then the cards are just too strong, right? Like, I feel like the cards are too strong is usually the issue, right? And this is something that is always going to be the case in Star Wars Unlimited unless they change the rules of the game. So like two cards per turn is just going to make for pretty consistent decks, right?
And have access to it. What this means is that these late game tools and these late game power outliers for Cad Bane in red and blue villainy are basically always there. There are very few games in which the deck does not get to do the thing that makes it the most frustrating and powerful, which is these powerful late game tools.
Yeah, okay, but like if that's the thing that makes them the most frustrating, why not take away that thing? Why not take away that thing? Why are we you know, I knew I was gonna feel this way about these arguments, but I actually want to try and understand, because like the one argument I can see is that games start feeling the same if every deck gets to do the same thing every time, which is one of the things that we're probably going to talk about when we get to Yu-Gi-Oh as well. But I think inherently still, I'm usually of the opinion, if you get to consistently do a fair thing, then that's good. If you get to consistently do an unfair thing, that's not good. The variable that changes is how unfair or fair is the thing you're doing. The consistency in that equation to me is not changing. So I don't think it's the factor that they should do, because I at least if I'm thinking it through, I don't feel like not consistently doing an unfair thing is not cool either. This is why I'm saying like I don't like consistency. It's because like now this deck gets to still do the exact same combo, but only half as often. But every time they do it, it's still going to be very frustrating. You know what I mean?
What this means is that if you are playing any other deck that is attempting to go later into the game, you...
It sounds dumb. If a guy throws a rock at my head every 5 minutes, I wouldn't want him to do it every 8 minutes. I want the guy throwing the rock to stop doing that. It's a little bit abstract, but I get what you're saying, and I agree with it. Yeah, no, it's not as dumb as you think it might sound, but the frequency at which they throw a rock at you is not the problem. Yeah, the frequency is not the issue. The issue is that they're throwing a freaking rock at your head, right? So I think that makes sense. Yeah,
you need to be able to know that your tools can compete very directly with Chimera, Ninth Sister, and Pre-Vizsla. And the reality of the current metagame is there are no other tools that are better than those.
Josh wants the rock to be smaller. Yeah, exactly. If the rock is not as big and it doesn't hurt you, then it's whatever, man. Throw your rocks. I don't care. I mean, eventually it'll probably annoy me if it's the same rock every 5 minutes. But you know, if it doesn't hurt, then you know it's better.
There are no other tools that can interact with those. So what's the problem here? The problem is the consistency.
It's actually, the more I think about it, it's a pretty good analogy. Actually, I think it's a good way to look at it.
The problem is, because of how many cards you draw, because of how much consistency you have in making your resource drops every turn, you can always resource. You're always going to hit 8 resources on turn 7. You're always...
There's another thing that I am thinking about with Star Wars Unlimited, which is, I'm just making an assumption. I don't know if it's actually true, but the way it sounds, and this might be another issue with the design of the game itself, or issue or good thing, depending on where you stand on it, but if you draw 2 cards every turn and then you put one of those cards into your resource system, it basically means that there are no bricks in your deck. If you draw a high cost card too early in the game, you can just resource it, if that's how it works. So there's no risk attached, quote unquote, no real opportunity cost to just throwing the most powerful end game cards into your deck. Like even in a like deck with a lower curve in mana terms, you could just throw some very expensive cards in there, and if you draw them early, well, just put them down there, right? Hello?
Gonna hit 7 resources on turn 6. You're almost always gonna have access to one of these cards, assuming you drew no other cards outside of just the ones from your draw step. It means that no other deck can really feasibly plan to play in the late game. And so that causes a lot of warping in it of itself. And this has often happened in Star Wars Unlimited metagames, where when there is a most powerful late game tool that only one deck gets access to, because they are going to always consistently get to that tool, it's very rare for other decks to be able to occupy similar spaces in the spectrum. And so you end up with a very...
Endgame bombs making a climax is why we play those types of games. I agree, but if you change the rules of a mana-based game, you do have to change the design accordingly. I'll make an example. In Legends of Runeterra, one of my favorite things about Legends of Runeterra, because it was a mana-based card game, was that you could carry over some mana from previous turns. So if you ever got unlucky and you didn't find like a 1-drop or a 2-drop, your mana would carry over to your next turns, but you could only use it for spells. You couldn't use it to play bigger units. So for example, if you didn't have a 1-drop, your 1 mana from turn 1 would carry over as spell mana for the next turn. And even then, if you didn't have a card on turn 2, your 2 mana from turn 2 would also carry over. So you would have 3 backup mana, which was the maximum. It would cap at 3. But you would have 3 backup mana on turn 3. So you could have 6 total mana on turn 3, but you couldn't play like a 6-cost unit, but you could play a 6-cost spell. What I mean by this is you have to adjust your card design to your game design. So in Runeterra, a lot of spells were lower quality if you compared them to like Magic cards or Hearthstone cards. Which were 2 games I was somewhat familiar at the time. I would always compare in my head. I would be like, okay, this card, 5 mana in Runeterra. In Hearthstone, this would be a very bad card for 5 mana. So in the beginning, the spells seemed bad to me. They seemed too expensive a lot of the times. But how it turns out is because spell mana is a mechanic in the game, you have to somewhat lower the quality of the spells. Otherwise, you could run them out way too easily and way too quickly. And the thing is, if you make a game like Star Wars in which cards are never a brick because you can resource them down, and you get to see your cards super consistently around turn 7 and turn 8, and your high drops it's not risky to put high drops into your deck because you can just resource them when you don't need them. You do have to turn down the power level of those cards a little bit. You know, maybe the solution is to have card effects like these 2 that he mentioned, that are so game warping on turn 7 and turn 8, maybe have them come down on turn 9 and turn 10 instead. Maybe the cards just need to be more expensive if they can be included in your deck at no real risk, and you can just see them very consistently. Maybe the cards need to be weaker in that sense. Maybe the curve cannot be this strong if these cards come down on turn 7 and turn 8. Maybe the same card is fine, but it comes down on turn 9. You know what I mean?
Narrow metagame where there's 2 or 3 decks that basically that are occupying different spaces on the speed spectrum. You have like an aggro deck, a mid-range deck, and a late game deck, and that's basically it in a lot of cases. And that's happening now. Now, the issues with CAD go further than that. There's also other problems than just the fact that the power of these late game tools is really oppressive. The other issues with CAD are related to the fact that he has a very powerful breakpoint fixing leader ability. You can, as an action on your turn, deal 1 damage to a unit with 2 or more health. This is intended to make it so that you can't ping things off to remove them off the board. But in practice, what this allows you to do is basically set things up so that they die to other damage-based removal. It allows you to set up your own units. You might well have things that want to be damaged in your deck, like Yugioh Bogdo is a good example of a card that actively wants to be pinged, and Cad Bane gets to do this for free. What's important here as well, though, is that because this ability is free and because it is just a generic, reasonable breakpoint fixer, it is, again, a consistency tool where you know you're always going to have access to something like that that increases the power level of the deck again.
I just got here. What game is this? This is a video on consistency in general in card games, and we're taking different examples from different card games. This one was from Star Wars Unlimited.
In terms of how you fix this, there have
Bro's called Yugioh Bogdo, by the way.
a couple of suggestions in the community. Some of them have been to simply ban Cad Bane. And I think that if you were to do that and you removed specifically this red Cad out of the meta, it probably would, at least in the short term, stop the bleeding on this metagame state. But the reality of the situation is that these...
Yeah, this is like the continuous effect that you always have access to, I think is... It's fine, it just depends how you use it, I guess. It's kind of comparable to the Yu-Gi-Oh! Extra deck, which are also cards that you always have access to. I don't feel like this is an issue per se, as long as it's designed in a way where it's not too broken.
Game tools in blue-red villainy are going to be problematically powerful no matter what. You're likely just going to be waiting until another red or blue villain leader comes along that can leverage these tools. In fact, there probably is a red or blue leader in the metagame already that could leverage these tools. They're just worse than CAD, so they're not being played yet.
Right, so we've identified the problem is that these 2 cards in particular, if that's even if they're the best example even, that these 2 cards are coming down consistently, like super like on turn 7 and turn 8, and they win games on the spot. So for me, it sounds like these cards are the problem, and that Star Wars needs to reevaluate how they design high cost cards, because the only other alternative would be to change the rules of the game, essentially, right? The other rule is you need to change how the game works in order to prevent this from happening, which I think is... I don't know if that's the approach I would use, because yeah.
Would that new leader be enough worse to make it so that...
Because we're already identifying, yeah, if you change the leader, then another deck is going to do the same thing, right? So it's not the leader. The leader is interchangeable. Vizslas reads crazy. Hold up, I didn't actually read it. Yeah, that's a good point, maybe.
Sorry. And then there's also Chimera Sisters at 7.
When played, defeat any number of non-leader units with a total of 6 or less remaining HP. Create a Mandalorian token for each unit defeated this way. So yeah, this guy comes down, kills a lot of stuff, and then makes a bunch of tokens. Which does seem like it seems like a very powerful card. The thing is, I don't play Star Wars. So I cannot tell you if this effect on an 8-cost unit is fair or not. Right? But it's like, if this is such a crazy effect, and it always swings the game if it comes down for 8 mana, or 8 whatever they call it, to me it feels like this should just be a more expensive card. This should just be like a 9-cost or 10-cost card, because how is consistency the issue? I haven't really heard an argument yet that I think justifies saying like, yeah, consistency is the problem here.
Would that new leader be enough worse to make it so that the metagame is solved and it's saved, and it's okay? I don't know. I think it's possible that it could be, but it also definitely might not be. And the other issue is it doesn't actually fix the problem of the fact that no other deck can compete with these villainy tools in the late game, these blue-red villainy tools. The other option is to start banning some of the tools. Maybe you ban Previsla, maybe you ban Chimera, you ban one of these late game tools, and you try to decrease the consistency of those decks. I think that would also be a reasonable approach to take, and very well might be an approach that they do ultimately decide to take, because in general, they've been kind of 50-50. They have banned a leader before in Boba Fett and in Jango Fett, but they've also sometimes attempted to just hit the tools that have been causing problems in the metagame. And I do think that there's a legitimate discussion about whether or not Cad Bane is the problem, or whether or not this top end of Ninth Sister, Previsla, and Chimera is the problem. So that's one example, and one example where consistency in systems, above all else, is causing a lot of problems for a metagame state. And I will point out that I do think, as much as I like the Star Wars Unlimited system of drawing 2 cards a turn and always hitting your resource drop, it is always going to eventually cause problems like this.
I don't know. I disagree with that, because like I like that system. It sounds good. It sounds like, because here's the thing, consistency removes a lot of negative experiences from playing a game, right? Like if you have a system where you draw 2 cards a turn and you resource one of them, first of all, that seems like a very meaningful decision to make every turn, but it just reduces the chances of bricking, reduces the chances of not being able to play the game in the first place. And you can, if there's a card that you don't want in a certain matchup, or you don't want to see it in this current game state, you're not drawing a blank for turn that you feel bad about. You just put it down in your resource system and you're okay. That seems like it creates a lot of, first of all, interesting decision making, but also removes a lot of frustrating things from card games, which, I mean, variance, I guess variance in general is an interesting topic for card games, because when you try to optimize in card games, you try to take as much variance out of it, but then variance also is kind of what makes card games card games. So because you can see it on the other end of the spectrum and say, like, if there's no variance at all, then you could just be playing a game that isn't a card game, right? Like, card games kind of live off of this concept of some level of variance, I suppose, where if, you know, you could just be playing chess or something where there's no variance at all. Like, what are you playing a card game for if you want to be doing the same thing over and over and over again? Which I think that's something I find that's a reasonable thing to say in, like, what's it called, in defense of variance. I think there needs to be a sweet spot somewhere in the middle. I think, and yeah, I guess if Star Wars is designed in a way where whatever, like, because let's say hypothetically, let's say people switch.
Also,
let's say people they ban Pre-Vizsla, or they make him more like balanced by nerfing him or whatever, and then people put a different 8-drop into their decks because this card is not available anymore, and then the deck gets to consistently always play that 8-drop on that turn, right? It's always the same 8-drop that they play. At some point, it becomes stale, maybe, that every time the same cards are being played on the same turns, right? The issue is, this is something that in mana-based games, with particularly the top end of the curve, you're always going to have this where every deck tries to do something in the end game, and they have a lot of time to find that card, whether it's turn 8, turn 9, turn 10. You have this in other games as well, right? Like, Magic decks are working towards a specific combo or a specific finisher. And every mana-based card game has this, right? Like, they try to drag out the game long enough to a point where then they start playing their really powerful cards, right? This is a little different to Yu-Gi-Oh, because Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have the same turn structure. So Yu-Gi-Oh is a whole different beast.
Level of consistency and how your resources develop and how you draw cards and the percentage of your deck that you see in any given game is ultimately going to crop up these same kinds of issues whenever they miss on balance of a card, even by a little bit. And so it is interesting. This is one where almost at a systemic level you have.
Yeah, it just means they can't miss on balance. It's the same thing. It's something I'm very frustrated with Yu-Gi-Oh as well. Like, people always say, the job of a card designer, the job of balancing a card game is very difficult, because what happens when you miss is very, very bad a lot of the times. When you design a card incorrectly, or make it slightly too powerful or way too powerful, it's very hard to fix. You need to be very careful with it. It's a difficult thing to do.
Have to wonder whether maximum deck size needs to increase by 10, or whether they need to take some other approach to get some of these percentages down. Because, as I say, I don't think that you can really feasibly have a situation where you're printing powerful 8-cost cards, knowing that a person is 90% to see one of them at any turn after turn 8. It's just too much. It's just too much consistency. The next example I want to talk about is Yu-Gi-Oh! Kind of broadly in the modern context.
Here we are.
This is a common knock against modern Yu-Gi-Oh! But broadly speaking, there has been a real rise in the number of one-card starters that ultimately branch back to the same combo line and result in the same end board. A good example.
This is 100% true about modern Yu-Gi-Oh! This is something you cannot argue with if you play modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And I guess what I would say to that is, if that bothers you, I think that's fair enough. I think this is just a game experience that Yu-Gi-Oh does not offer anymore. It's something that Yu-Gi-Oh offered back in the day, this sort of like developing your strategy over the course of multiple turns, and you could try to do it in different ways, try to set up, see what your opponent was trying to do and stuff like that, which is essentially emulating the experience from mana-based card games. And I think the people that play Yu-Gi-Oh nowadays, or the people that really like modern Yu-Gi-Oh, it might be because it doesn't work this way, right? Like Yu-Gi-Oh is a different kind of game. Yu-Gi-Oh is a game where every deck, almost every deck, is trying to set up the same board every time. This is true, right? If you play a deck, you have a specific end board in mind that you're trying to reach. The variance in Yu-Gi-Oh, and I mean the variance not in terms of the statistical variance, but the diversity in gameplay from Yu-Gi-Oh is the gameplay that happens after that. Is basically the player going first in Yu-Gi-Oh makes a board, the player going second tries to crack it. That is the game flow of Yu-Gi-Oh. Is not turn-based, like 10 turns, develop cards, work towards a long-term goal. This is not what Yu-Gi-Oh is anymore. And I mean this with no positive or negative, you know, connotation. This is just how the game works. Yu-Gi-Oh is a game where if you go first, your job is to make a board. And if you go second, your job is to break that board and then win the game from there. And then sometimes a grind game happens. Sometimes you can't break it and you lose. Sometimes you OTK immediately. Sometimes you have to set up for multiple turns, right? And then that's just the game flow of Yu-Gi-Oh. And in this game flow, the way modern Yu-Gi-Oh works, we simply cannot really afford bricks anymore, right? Like if you draw a slow hand in Yu-Gi-Oh in 2010, that's fine. If you draw a slow hand in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, if you draw a hand that does nothing, you almost always just die in modern Yu-Gi-Oh. This is why I think they've just gone towards making every deck hyper consistent, right? And whenever something is hyper consistent, it's going to try to do the same thing. Like people are going to find a optimal way to make an end board with a deck, and then the deck tries to do that every time. And this is specifically why maybe my view on consistency as mainly a Yu-Gi-Oh player is different from his idea, right? Which I think is okay, because if you come from a mana-based card game, I think it is different maybe. But with Yu-Gi-Oh, like we kind of need this. We kind of need this consistency to be here. What we need to worry about is the thing that the deck is doing fine? Is the thing that the deck is doing something that the player going second can manage? Because in this game that we're playing nowadays with player 1 makes board, player 2 tries to break board, Yu-Gi-Oh is kind of like a puzzle game, right? Like player 1 creates a puzzle and player 2 tries to solve the puzzle. It's kind of like friggin' what's that game called? Mario Maker, where you make levels and then other people play them. It's kind of like that. And that it can be fun. It can be a fun and challenging game if you engage with it. But you simply cannot afford to not make a board. Like we need stuff to be consistent. But if the thing that the decks are doing, is too much, is too strong, is not beatable, then the player going second gets a puzzle that they can't solve, right? That's not fun either, right? So that's why in Yu-Gi-Oh, I think the way modern Yu-Gi-Oh works, consistency can never be the issue. Consistency is necessary for the game to work, because if you're going first and you fail to even make a puzzle for your opponent, you instantly lose the game. And if you're going second and you don't have a starter either or whatever, then you have no chance of winning the game either. So we need Yu-Gi-Oh decks to play, you know? And I think honestly, in Yu-Gi-Oh terms, it just comes down to everyone wants to play the game, and consistency in Yu-Gi-Oh often comes down to just, do you draw a starter or not? And then if you draw a starter, you can do your stuff, and if you don't, then you can't do your stuff, right? This is something they would have to change the game fundamentally to move away from that idea. And I actually, even though I love mana-based card games, I've had a lot of fun in my days with Hearthstone and other games like that. I enjoyed Riftbound when I tried it. I enjoy Magic whenever I play it, even though those games, they all have flaws. But I enjoyed that type of gameplay as well, because it is, to me, as someone who even likes to play more control-y strategies in Yu-Gi-Oh, I actually quite enjoy this kind of like turn-based thing where you build up to something over a long period of time, right? Like turn 1 you do this, turn 2 you do this, turn 3 and like you develop and you get like it becomes, you play bigger and bigger cards and stuff. I enjoy that. I do enjoy that, but I don't want Yu-Gi-Oh to be that, because I think Yu-Gi-Oh excels at being its own thing. Yu-Gi-Oh is probably one of the most unique card games out there because it doesn't fit into that thing anymore. Like if Yu-Gi-Oh was like 2010 Yu-Gi-Oh to me is fun and nostalgic and everything, or like even older formats, it's not that different from every mana-based card game out there. And I think that's what makes it special. I think that's what makes it special. I think that's what makes it unique in its modern day form. It also does make it so Yu-Gi-Oh has its very own set of issues that it has to work with. Absolutely. You know, I'm not saying Yu-Gi-Oh is perfect. I'm just saying Yu-Gi-Oh is fundamentally different from other games, and I think that's good. But in the way that Yu-Gi-Oh functions, I do think consistency is absolutely a necessity, right? The funny thing is that I actually think that like obtaining consistency by having 15 one-card starters that all do the same thing, just in maybe slightly different sequence, is kind of lazy. I personally think there's so many ways to achieve consistency in Yu-Gi-Oh that are better than, oh, here's one card starters that all do the same thing, because you could make decks that just try to follow a very consistent game plan but have non-linear combos or 2 to 3 card combo combinations that change the way you play the game. Those are just harder to make. Those are just hard. Like genuinely, the way I imagine it going in Yu-Gi-Oh card design is someone sits down and designs like one card after another. They're like, here, this card is supposed to be a starter. Let's make it summon itself and then search. And then what does it search? Let's make that card next, right? And then they go through the steps that the combo is supposed to have, and then just like just do all that, right? When I feel like there's so much more design space that's not explored, or like, you know, I don't have a particular example, but just fusion-based strategies as well, where you have different ways to combine your cards would be really cool. There's a lot of things that they could do. There's a lot of things that they could do, but I mean, the way modern Yu-Gi-Oh works, the decks just need to be consistent.
Example of this is actually in one of the most prominent metagame decks right now in Cool Tune, which is theoretically trying to work against this trend. The Cool Tune archetype is structured around synchro summoning powerful monsters out of your extra deck, getting effects from your main deck monsters when they are used as synchro summoning material. And importantly, each of the synchro summons from the extra deck require a specific main deck monster in order to be able to be synchro summoned, or most of them do anyway. So theoretically, what you would expect is that would lead to a gameplay pattern where, depending on how the texture of your opening hand goes, it's going to dictate which extra deck monsters you get into play and how you structure your turn. Unfortunately, in practice, because all of the monsters in this deck search for other monsters, you can very easily craft the hand you want in order to get to the extra deck monsters that matter. And all of these kind of branching path combo lines.
This is also something that I would think could be more fun in Yu-Gi-Oh! Is when not everything searches everything. Like, I imagine it in a world where you like imagine Yami, like a deck like Yami Mitsurugi, but it just cannot bridge. But you still play them together. Like, I'm not saying exactly that deck, but a deck like that. Like, imagine two archetypes that just flow well together, but they cannot bridge into each other. So the deck would, based on your opening hand, based on what kind of cards you've opened, you would maybe in one game you would be playing more of the Mitsu lines. In another game you would be playing more of the Yami lines, and the archetype names here are interchangeable, where you don't get guaranteed access to both of your engines, but instead you just play with what you're presented with, right? And this is something that we have examples of this in recent history. Like the Chaos branded that I played is not very good at bridging into each other, because I didn't include the Red Dragon Archfiend monster to search the Grifo. That deck, you sometimes you draw Albaz plus Chaos, sometimes you draw just Albaz, sometimes you draw just Chaos, and you have to deal with it, right? Or Branded Dracotail, sometimes you draw just Dracotail cards and you just have to play pure Dracotail. And there's other examples of this too. And I think this is where I would Yu-Gi-Oh I would like Yu-Gi-Oh to be like the high engine, the combo decks in Yu-Gi-Oh, I think should be that. I think they should be decks that just play a high count of engine cards because they want to combine multiple engines. But combining multiple engines is not done in a way where you can just bridge. You actually have to draw multiple engine pieces to get access to multiple engines, which also forces you to include more engine cards in your decks, right? Like the Yami Mitsurugi decks, very, very often they would play a very minimal package of one of the two decks because it would be like, okay, well, if I start with Mitsu, I can search Yami anyways. If I start with Yami, I can search Mitsu anyways. So why would I max on engine? I'm just going to play as much non-engine as I can and play a very minimal Yami package because I can search it anyways. Or minimal Mitsurugi package because I can search it anyways, right? So I think the problem is the bridging in that example, right? And I think that would be very, very helpful if they got rid of that.
All kind of lead to the same place, and they lead to whatever end board you want because you have so much optionality. It means that you end up with these kind of over-centralizing strategies much more commonly. A good example of this is Cool Tune. It's always getting to the same place. One of my complaints with a deck like Draco Tail in the past.
Can you break a board with just engine if they always full combo? There are decks that can, and there are formats where people can, and that is also on the game designers to make sure that that's possible. Like this is something like the return of engine versus engine Yu-Gi-Oh is something I am hoping for. And I'm not saying there should be no non-engine involved. Absolutely there should be, but I think the modern game is very centralized on non-engine. And that's also why, like, if in a world where you have two decks that theoretically can go together, a lot of the time people will decide against it because they would rather play, instead of having a secondary engine in a deck, they would rather just have 15 hand traps.
Was that it was also doing the same thing. You, from basically any starting point, if you had enough Draco Tail names in your hand, you were going to get enough spell trap searches to be able to do your Rahu, your Ketu, and do more or less the same thing, really agnostic of what.
This is something, yeah, I mean, I don't, like I said earlier, this is fair criticism of Yu-Gi-Oh! And if you don't like it, that's fair enough. But the fact that Draco Tail always ends on the same 3 traps is just kind of like the nature of the deck. Like it needs to work this way. And Yu-Gi-Oh decks need to work that way in at least to an extent.
Your opening hand's texture was, barring having no names, which is obviously something that could happen. So maybe that's an argument against what I'm saying here. These over-centralized combo lines are more of a reflection of card design than they are system design. I actually think, arguably, Yu-Gi-Oh! Systems are pretty well set up to allow you to have variant play based on the texture of your opening hand. The extra deck does a nice job of kind of creating this buffer where you are going to get to do something pretty consistently. And I think if they were tighter on their design decisions on allowing generic rank 4s to go like search anything of a type, like cards like King of the Pharaoh Imps are pretty problematic in this regard because they allow you to be kind of too generic and then go get something really specific.
This is a great point. Like Yu-Gi-Oh can have this. Yu-Gi-Oh can have this if engines just don't bridge into other engines as much. Then here's the thing, decks would still try to do similar things, but if we had less bridges, then people who want to play hardcore combo stuff, they would like, and I mean bridges in terms of both main and extra deck, just ways to search all of your cards. Then you would be forced to play more engine to get to a bigger board. And then you would also be forced to maybe at some point include multiple engines and actually have to draw multiple engines to do the really powerful thing.
But there certainly are examples of, I think, relatively well-managed archetypes that do care pretty successfully about what your opening hand looks like. DDD is a good example of this, where you really do have to really closely analyze exactly what your starters are, and that's going to...
No, that's DDD like 10 years ago. DDD does not do this anymore. DDD is the exact opposite of that. DDD... DDD has DDD just has very, very, very mapped out combos now and ends on basically the same thing every time. Sometimes it's like, okay, if you have an extra extender next to your 1-card starter, then you also get to summon this guy on top of it. But most of the time, DDD has multiple tools now to search every single card they want. And they will search every single card they want if they get to play. DDD, it's interesting because DDD was actually once known for this. DDD was this kind of deck that he's describing, but it's just not in
how
modern
you're going to
Yu-Gi-Oh
branch
anymore.
through the combo paths. That is an example of a very complicated deck, and I think that in general they are maybe trying to avoid creating strategies with that level of complexity because it's a challenging experience for new players to on board with. But even something that is comparatively simpler, like Lunalight, which is still again a combo deck, does have fairly diverse draws and combo lines contextual on what your opening hand is.
Yeah, but like Lunalight still ends on the same board every time, right? If they get the full combo and they do it properly. I'm just trying to understand what's the problem. Is that we always play the same line to get there, or we end on the same thing? Because like Lunalight, I will agree, not every Lunalight combo plays the same. You have to sequence those things differently depending on what you open and especially what hand traps you're trying to play around. But the goal is still always the same, right? The point is more of the path than the end board. Right, but then like we also use Draco Tail as an example, and Draco Tail is also a deck that, depending on how the hand is set up, you would sequence it very differently. You would still try to get to the same thing a lot of the times, but you would still, based on your opening hand, you would start in very different ways. And not always do the same thing. Like sometimes you start with the Rahu, sometimes you start with the Mululu. You know, it's not like the Draco Tail combo itself is super linear. It is kind of like draw your opening hand and see how you go about it. Why can't I click play sometimes?
In general, the consistency here has more to do with the construction of cards and the way that they link back through the same chains no matter what. I think that this is something that can be resolved, although I don't know that they necessarily feel a lot of incentive to do so. Certainly modern designs have been trending more towards the kind of centralized one lane of combo direction than they are into the branching paths, non-deterministic.
The thing is, like, the way I feel about this is maybe if we talked about this exact thing like 4 years ago when I started complaining about cards like Circular, I would have wholeheartedly agreed with all of this. I would have said like, yeah, one card combos are stupid and there shouldn't be a whole bunch of steps for one card combos. I did feel about this like this way at some point. So I do see where we're coming from. But because of what I just explained a few minutes ago about how modern Yu-Gi-Oh works and how it's developed in the last couple of years, I now think we are at a point where that is just how the game works. I still think there are more creative ways of making decks consistent outside of just one card combos. Like I said, I can imagine a world where decks play with 2 to 3 cards and try to combine them in different ways, especially if you remove all the bridging and this card searches that card, which searches that card, which summons that card. I think this is something that I would like for them to go away from a little bit. But still, overall, the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh decks are trying to do the same thing and have standardized combos, I think in the context of modern Yu-Gi-Oh is fine. I've made my peace with it. But I do see where we're coming from here.
Me personally, I would much rather see something non-deterministic be more of the norm and force players to have to think on their feet. But I also understand that that is not necessarily the gameplay experience that Konami is going for with Yu-Gi-Oh.
The way I look at it is like the interesting part in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, the thing where people make meaningful decisions and stuff like that happens usually on turn 2, right? Like turn 1 is kind of just like the cutscene where player 1 makes their board, and then the interesting gameplay is supposed to start on turn 2. And these are the things that mainly make me frustrated with Yu-Gi-Oh, and the things that I complain about most are the things that prevent gameplay from getting interesting after a board is being made, right? Like the things that make it so the player going first can't play the game at all, not interesting. Whenever a board is being made that doesn't require any sort of level of critical thinking because it's just so auto win, that's not good. And just stuff that prevents gameplay from happening, like floodgates. Those are the things that I complain about most, because I feel like Yu-Gi-Oh should be an interesting game as soon as the player going second starts playing into the board. That's the most important thing to me. I understand that people find certain decks boring when they go first because they do the same thing every time. I think that's a valid argument, but I do think, for me personally, that's fine as long as they provide interesting gameplay when the player going second breaks into the board. That was one of my main things I kept saying during Ryzeal format, because people were saying that about Ryzeal. Ryzeal is a boring deck because it always does like special level 4, summon level 4, which I get. Yeah, the Ryzeal turn 1 is not very like entertaining or anything like that. Ryzeal turn 1 is kind of just like do your thing back then, like summon your duo drive, summon your detonator, set up your cross and stuff like that. The reason why I was okay with Ryzeal was because the playing into the detonator was fun, you know. Playing into the detonator was interesting. The Ryzeal board was not so auto win that you would just click buttons and win the game. You actually had to make meaningful decisions when you made your board and stuff like that, right? That was one of the main factors that to me was the difference between Ryzeal and Malice, because people said like, okay, at least Malice is a difficult deck to combo with, and it's like Ryzeal was a difficult deck too, not to make your end board with, but to play with your opponent, because your board was not nearly as auto win as the Malice board. So like, yeah, maybe the Malice turn 1 was more challenging, but honestly, it was nothing that someone with a lot of time on their hands couldn't just learn the lines for against hand traps. Like, it was just like you just need to study up and then you can play Malice going first. But then interrupting with Ryzeal was difficult. Interrupting with Malice was not really, because you had so much. And so that's kind of how I feel. That's how I interpret modern Yu-Gi-Oh! For me. And I think it's okay if people look at it in a different way. But it's just my perspective on the game now.
So we've had two different examples now. One where I think very, very largely the issues are related to systems in Star Wars Unlimited.
We don't have to discuss Ryzeal and Malice in depth now. Like, I know Ryzeal Cross, for example, is a card that I also had a big issue with. The bridging that Ryzeal was doing is something I had a big issue with, but it's just an example I just thought of.
And then one in which the issues are very, very clearly related to specific card design in Yu-Gi-Oh! The last example I want to provide is one where I think it's some of both. There are issues on both sides that are resulting in kind of negative metagame states, and that's Riftbound. I don't think the Riftbound meta is especially bad right now, but if you were going to point to an element of the Riftbound meta that has been frustrating for the last couple of sets at this point, it would be the prevalence of the purple decks and how powerful purple as a color is. There are a lot of reasons for this.
What's wrong with purple?
I've talked about them extensively. You can go click on basically any of my Riftbound videos.
Yeah, I feel like, if anything, a good example for consistency being a bad thing in Riftbound would have been the Lux deck. Right, because from what I've learned about the Lux deck, and I guess not every one of you has seen the Riftbound Invitational I played in, and are not familiar with Riftbound, but there is a deck in Riftbound that very consistently on turn 4 or 5 has an infinite loop that wins you the game. That is very hard to interact with. So I would have thought that would have been a very good like point to bring up for why consistency is bad. But once again, I feel like the problem is that there's an infinite loop on turn 4 in your game, which should not exist, I think. But yeah, we're using purple as an example. Interesting.
Crashing out about the power of purple. They made a big ban pass after set 2 for exactly this reason. Draven was too powerful, and the card Fight or Flight got banned. But to me, Called Shot also got banned. But to me, the actual problem card that has remained through all of this and is going to continue to cause problems for as long as it remains legal in the Riftbound metagame is Stack Deck. So Riftbound is a 40...
Dude, don't hate on my boy Stack Deck. That was my favorite card to play with, man. Look at the top 3 cards of your deck, put 1 into your hand, recycle the rest. Come on, man.
Card 3 of game. You get a fair amount of consistency simply by the deck construction rules themselves. The math on drawing a specific one of in your opening 6 cards, because you get to mulligan 2 of them, is already pretty decent. You're like more than 25% to see a card if you look really hard for it. And then when you factor in that, again, you have consistent resources. You're always getting 2 resources every turn. So there's the same consistency where the resources are not in your deck. You are always going to have access to your tools. And then you add in a card like Stack Deck, which like
this just pot of duality without locks. Yeah, but there's a cost attached to it. It does cost 1 mana. Like, that is significant.
You look at the top 3 cards of your deck and put 1 in your hand, the consistency begins to become quite oppressive feeling. And that has been reflected in the overall metagame prevalence of Sivir, Diana, and Aurelia, 3 of the top 5 decks for the last 2 metagames at this point, in large part to the fact that they get to leverage Stack Deck at a very high rate. To make matters even worse, in Vendetta, they introduced Kennen, whose signature spell, Lightning Rush, is just Stack Deck plus...
Dude, this card's awesome. I saw this card. This is Stack Deck, but you can do it twice, because you can do it once again from the graveyard. It's awesome.
flashback, it has flow, you have to play it again. It puts the cards into the graveyard rather than the bottom of your deck, which is actually an upside in some instances. And unsurprisingly, Kennen is the most widely played new Vendetta legend. It's very clearly going to be a powerful archetype, and it's something that has a lot of different branching paths that you can go down in terms of its deck construction because of the power of Stack Deck and Lightning Rush to streamline the consistency of the deck. Will it become too powerful? I think time will tell. We will see after the first couple of large tournaments whether or not we see Kennen really coming into prominence and replacing some of the other strong.
I love Kennen. I loved Kennen in Runeterra too. Ari Kennen was an awesome deck.
But it certainly seems as though, even based on early reporting, it's definitely going to be a playable deck that you're going to see at a fairly high rate. The issues in Riftbound are twofold. One, at a systemic level, guaranteed resources in conjunction with 40 card, 3 of decks is already very consistent. And I think that you would be at risk of running afoul of some consistency issues regardless with those deck building rules. And when I say 40, it's really 39 card decks, because your chosen champion starts in your deck but then ends up in the chosen champion zone. So
my streamer is biased on card draw. I mean, there's just something in me that I love seeing more options. I think more options is something that does introduce skill into the game. So like a card like, look at the top 3, choose one to put into your hand. I just think that's an interesting effect to have in a card game, especially when it has a mana cost attached to it. Like, yeah, if that card was 0 mana, that card would have been broken. But I feel like as soon as there's an appropriate cost to it, which I think 1 is an appropriate cost for an effect like that because it doesn't create card advantage. I just think it's interesting. I think it's good. I don't like the idea of, well, you draw your cards and whatever the order you draw the cards in, that's just how the game goes. You have no control over it. I think there needs to be a middle ground where, you know, some amount of digging, some amount of drawing, some amount of whatever is possible. And I don't think Riftbound has like an insane amount of it. I think it's fine. I do think that, of course, you would have to make sure that, you know, all the colors, if you want a balanced metagame like that, like not purple gets all the love and all the good cards, and then the other decks don't get those cards. I think you need to, if like for example, because we said like, okay, most of the good decks in Runeterra have purple in it because they can play stack deck. Okay, sure. Then give other colors, other good cards to have a reason to play those, I think, is how I feel about it. It's like make another deck or make another card. It doesn't even have to be a consistency card. It just needs to be a good card, a good reason to play another color, and you're fine, right? And then like, okay, purple is the one that's good at controlling the game or drawing cards. Sure, let it be that way. And then give me a reason to play green, or give me a reason to play orange, give me a reason to play red that purple doesn't have. And then when you're choosing a deck, when you're building a deck, you make a meaningful decision of, do I go the route of consistency and card draw? I'll pick purple. Do I pick the route of maybe like really good removal? I'll pick another one, right? What people forget is that every deck is 2 colors, but the same argument still applies, right? You still choose you still choose your combination, so you can combine. Let's say one color is really good at removal, the other one is really good at drawing, the other one is really good at having high quality stats minions, the other one is really good at having board wipes, right? Like mass removal and something, and then you combine. You like, okay, I want control and I want this, and then you piece them together. The problem only happens when like there's a good reason to play purple, which is stack deck, but then there's no good reason to play orange. So of course everyone picks the combinations that have purple, right?
Decks, you have a little bit more consistency. On top of that, you also have this insistence on printing draw cards and printing selection cards into only some of the colors, and you see that reflected down into what legends are ultimately playable. There's a real division of kind of have and have not colors in Riftbound, where if you don't have access to, I've kind of posited that it's, if you aren't playing one of purple, green, or orange, your deck is starting off on a bad spot, basically. Like, you need a really good reason to not be playing at least one of those colors. Obviously.
Yeah, okay, but like I said, I think if it's what purple, green, orange are the really good colors because they have really good cards. Because I've played a purple deck at the Riftbound Invitational, I understand what we're talking about with purple. With green, I would think cards like Charm and Defy are incredibly strong. So those are the reasons to play green. With orange, I think it's something like Sabotage. Punch First, I think, is a really strong card, if I remember correctly. So those are your reasons to play orange. And then it's like, well, give people a reason to choose blue. Give people a reason to choose What else do they have? Yellow, blue, and red are the other three, right? Yeah, give people reasons to play those colors. Make good cards for them. I did notice this with Riftbound. I was looking at a lot of their card reveals and stuff. Maybe it's just me, but I feel like they are printing relatively bad cards overall. There's a couple of outliers, of course. They have good cards, but the majority of cards, like for example, I was following after I played the Riftbound Invitational. I made friends with a couple of people, and I follow a little bit of what's going on. And they had like a new set release recently, the one that had Kennen in it. And from my outside perspective, like I saw a lot of card reveals for like Vendetta, yes, for Vendetta, where I looked at the cards and I could be wrong on this evaluation, but from what I have already experienced in terms of power level from the game, a lot of the cards that I saw, they were very, very bad. And not all of them, some of them were really good, like Kennen's signature spell. But there were a lot of cards where I just felt like they were not very good. And I think this is something that amplifies this issue if they are designing overall a lot of duds, a lot of cards that aren't very exciting. Of course, the few that are good will stand out massively, right? The Empower mechanic, yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of the Empower mechanic either. I think a lot of the cards looked very lackluster to me.
Decks in the metagame that are like, you know,
like main set final reveal filler cards level. Yeah, exactly. There were a lot of cards that I felt the same way about when we look at Yu-Gi-Oh card set releases or reveals, and it's just like, this card is obviously a pack filler. No one is ever going to play this. And I felt like from the percentage of cards that I saw from Vendetta that were like this, it was like half of them, almost, it feels like. Once again, gut feeling, I might be wrong on my card evaluation. I've played Riftbound, not a lot, but I've played other mana-based card games in the past, and I have some experience with the game because I looked into it for the Invitational. And a lot of the cards, compared to, like, I'm comparing them to the cards that saw play at that Invitational, right? Like, I knew all the cards in my deck and all the cards in other people's decks. Like, most of the cards are just straight up worse than a lot of the cards that already are out there. So they're doing, like, reverse power creep, essentially. They're just printing bad cards for the state that the game is in, and I feel like that makes it so well. I mean, obviously, if you already have really good purple cards and you're just making a bunch of bad cards, like, no one is going to go away from purple, right? And that's also the few people I follow so far, from what I've heard, like the best decks from the previous format are still really, really good, if not the best, compared to the new stuff. But there are outliers. There are good cards that are going to see play, of course, but it's just that a lot of the cards are not very exciting.
Yellow blue, like Victor is still going to be a playable thing. We'll see Victor around. We might well see that Lux combo deck still being played. It's not as though you cannot play these colors at all, but you need a really good reason to not be playing one of these other three colors. And that is in large part because they offer such high quality card draw or selection, or in Orange's case, it's mostly just raw card power that it has to offer. But ultimately, this all comes back to,
that won't be good for their pack selling. It depends, because I think Riftbound is doing something that Yu-Gi-Oh is now attempting to do as well, which it does a really good job at having chase cards that have nothing to do with the playability, right? You have like the signature stuff and alt arts and stuff like that, which is something that, you know, is going to help the set tremendously. Like, I think people are still excited for the set because there's special stuff in there. And also, not all the cards are bad. There are still chase cards. It just means that, like, instead of completely shaping up the meta from scratch, or like really shaking up things, there's just going to be like a couple new decks or a couple of new cards added into existing decks, and that's about it, I think.
An issue of consistency. These decks are doing the same thing too often, both because of the system design and because of the individual.
Have you read Mel's signature spell? Yeah, that card seemed broken. But like, the thing with signature spells is that they only have impact on one deck, right? Like, a signature spell you can only play in that deck is not, I mean, of course, that deck can enter the metagame, but it's not going to help the overall color identity get better, right? Like, the color doesn't improve from a signature spell because it's only one deck that can play it.
So that's kind of three examples, one on either extreme of, like, all of it is basically system related. In Star Wars Unlimited, in the Yu-Gi-Oh context, it's I would say basically all related to specific card design. You could argue the extra deck is a consistency issue from a systemic standpoint. I think there are ways that you can design extra deck monsters that don't run into this problem, and
Yes.
I have a whole
The extra deck and consistency are a very interesting topic together, because the extra deck is essentially always there, so it's always consistent. And this is where I am particularly mad at certain things, because that it's essentially, if there's a problem in the extra deck in Yu-Gi-Oh, it's going to be there every game. This is why they need to be so much more aggressive with the generic endboard pieces. That it's one of the things that makes me the most mad in modern Yu-Gi-Oh is when there's generic extra deck tools that are either combo enablers or endboard pieces. Both of those things I think should almost never be in the extra deck. The extra deck should mainly be utility stuff and archetypal stuff, in my opinion. Something like, and utility, I mean like removal, like a Zeus or SP or something that helps you play into a board, or Typhon. But not like, oh, here's an Isolt that summons from the deck, or here's a King of the Pharaoh Imps that searches from the deck, here's a Zena that sends from the deck, here's a bridge into this archetype. And then it also shouldn't be just endboard pieces that any deck can use. Like, it's completely fine if you make an archetypal endboard piece that's in the extra deck that your deck has access to, sure. But I don't think we should have cards like Baron, Varudras, Cyframe Lord Omega, and stuff like that. Just because it's every time there's a synchro deck, it can make it. Every time there's a deck with level 10s, it can make Varudras. And it's just so much easier for those cards to make a deck unbalanced, right? Because whenever they design a level 10 strategy, they have to factor in that it makes Varudras. And I don't think they do. I don't think they really factor it in because, like, you know, why are all the power patrons level 10? That deck is ending on enough. But, you know, generic endboard pieces should... This is where consistency is a problem. I mean, once again, the card being accessible all the time is still the problem, but it is a problem because it's available at all times, which is something that you cannot change this about Yu-Gi-Oh! Like, the Yu-Gi-Oh! Works this way, right? Yu-Gi-Oh! Has the extra deck available at all times, so you gotta be freaking careful what cards you put in there. You gotta be freaking careful. And it's confusing to me as well, because if I think about it from a marketing standpoint for them, I don't know how good of a thing it is to have extra deck staples, because extra deck staples, you sell them once, and then they stay in the game for a very long time, right? Like, they always seem so eager of, like, making us, like, buy new archetypes or whatever, like rotating the archetypes that are viable, but they don't seem so eager about rotating the staples, but which I feel like would make them a lot of money too, right? Like, you know, like half of, like, when you buy a new Yu-Gi-Oh deck these days, you don't buy a completely new Yu-Gi-Oh deck. You don't buy 40 new cards. You buy like 20. Because half of your deck is already made. Like, half of your deck is like, here's Fuba, Ash, Droll, Alt by Talents, whatever. You know, that kind of thing is set in stone. So why are we not rotating that?
Video talking about the extra deck and how much I like it, and now that I've played a bunch more Yu-Gi-Oh, I might even make a follow-up to that video because I like the extra deck even more as a mechanic the more that I've been playing. And then in Riftbound you have a balance of the two. There's systemic issues in the consistency, and then there are also issues in specific card design. And you'll notice these are all current issues, and they're design trends that designers are...
Maintenance has been extended. How long is it now, dude? Will I get to play this game today or not? Hold on, let me check real quick. 13. Oh my god. Well, good thing we're here to yap about the game.
Are moving towards, not away from. And that's conscious. We have made a deliberate choice in the current era of game design to move away from gameplay that has high roll and low roll elements. Keeping players engaged matters. It's really important, and having players feel like they're dead.
I think it's important to hit a sweet spot. I think there needs to be a balance of it. I don't want to play a game where every game plays out the same way, but I also don't want to play a game where, you know, there's too much variance. And of course, different games are gonna land somewhere in that spectrum. Yeah.
Does something is the best way that you are going to engage players. The more often that someone's deck doesn't do the thing, for lack of a better word, they're more likely to churn, feel like this game isn't worth playing, decide they want to go play something else, and that's obviously a really negative thing. Similarly, really high roll gameplay where your opponent, draws some power 1 of or power 2 of on the first 2 turns of the game, and statistically they weren't likely to do it, but they did, and now you got crushed. That's not super engaging either. And additionally, on the low roll side, one of the big knocks against something like Magic is when you run into these spots where you don't draw lands or where you get stuck on missing a colored
Yeah, I mean, Magic is a fun game, but in terms of mana-based card games, it has the worst mana system out there by far, because that's the worst kind of variance. The worst kind of variance is the Magic like land system. It's abysmal. It is so bad. I'll go out on a limb and I'll say I think if Magic as a game wasn't like the first of its kind, I think it wouldn't succeed. I think if we had like imagine a world where everything is the way it is, but Magic doesn't exist yet, and then they brought it out, like they released it right now, I think no one would play it. I think people would look at it, they would compare it to existing systems, and they would say like, yeah, that's worse. I'm not playing that. I think Magic only exists because it was the first of its kind, and it has like an existing like fan base.
Mana source for X number of turns. These are really frustrating gameplay experiences.
To be fair, the same thing could be said about Yu-Gi-Oh! Yeah, but then it wouldn't be true. You could say it, but it'd be wrong.
And so we do see designers very clearly trying to design away from those experiences. The tension is if we go too far the other way and we introduce too much consistency, we make sure that your deck does the same thing almost every game, you run into, for me, issues of it not being as fun, and that's a personal preference. But on a very practical level, and I think from a more objective standpoint, you are going to run into balance problems with consistency. When you miss on balance, if you are missing on balance and the decks are really consistent, you are going to feel the effects of those misbalance changes even more significantly.
Yes, that is true.
Card games are tricky. It's not like digital spec card games like Hearthstone, where you can release cards at a higher power level, scale them back quickly, or maybe ban them outright, like we've seen more recently.
Also, I just want to clarify, I don't mean to hate on Magic in that way. I still think Magic is a good game despite its flaws, because I think this is something that every game has flaws. I'm just saying the land system in Magic is one of its biggest flaws. I'm not saying it's not worth playing or it's not a good game. It is a fun game, and whenever I have played Magic, I have enjoyed my time. But I do think this land system is just a lot worse than basically every other card game, every other mana card game.
And much more willing to make these kinds of changes and to make these kinds of bans. In physical card games, your options are, if you print something too high, your only way out is emergency ban, i.e. what people are asking for in Star Wars Unlimited right now. Emergency bans are not fun. They're really bad for games and game trust, for people feeling as though, their cards are going to continue to be playable. And so as a result, it's not something that people really want to do. So this tension is tough. This tension is challenging to resolve. And I think
it is challenging, and this is why it's so frustrating to me, because once the cards are out there, it's really hard to change stuff. And I mean, it sounds so simple, well, just ban it, but banning a card that is broken but already out there is going to leave some people very unhappy. The ban list is supposed to be like a kind of last ditch solution, or however you say it. It's not supposed to be something that they always use for everything, but like, people will be really mad if a card gets banned, even if it's a really powerful one that's obviously broken. I'm like, of course, the majority of the competitive community was happy when a card like Baron was banned, or a card like Appaloosa, but I'm sure there are people out there who are not happy about it because their deck was using it, or they spend a lot of money on like a Starlight Apple or whatever. Or Baron was a very expensive card. People played freaking what was Baron, like $100, and then eventually it got banned, and then they'll be like, yeah, that feels bad. The solution is you just need to be more careful when you make the cards. If getting rid of a card is so difficult, then you need to spend that extra energy. Then you can't make lazy card designs. You just have to put in the work to make sure that the card is properly balanced. That's just how it goes, we can't have the ban list be super cautious with everything and not want to ban cards all the time, and then make cards like Baron or Apple or Zena and stuff like that. We just can't make them. You just can't. I can't fathom how this happens all the time. It's so weird to me.
Seeing more,
like we had to ban Beatrice, Lavalval Chain, there's another one, Curious. All three had to be banned. And then we make Xena. It is mind-blowing to me how that happened.
More
mind-blowing.
Lean to the side of, I'm going to accept that the game is a little bit too consistent so that I don't churn people for not having fun, versus I'm going to...
They are not banning Xena. Oh, they are banning Xena. They are going to have no choice but to ban Xena. Not right now, but they are going to ban it 100%. I would bet everything on that. Xena has to be banned. That card, on the day that it came out, had a banned symbol on it at some point in the future. There's no way this card stays legal. The question is just for how long. And that's why it's so stupid. That's why it's so stupid to make. Because it needs to go. And I think that's why it's not a secret rare. Probably. Because they know it has to go. They just know it.
Let the game be high variance, but people are going to enjoy the high variance highs enough that they're going to stick around. And I think that that's kind of the dichotomy that you're running up against.
But Curious is at 3 in OCG format. Who cares about traditional format, man?
Like? What's the aspirational position for consistent and engaging?
Also, Xena is literally better than
I got a couple of examples
Curious
here, and I've got kind of an overall thesis statement that you've already probably heard me saying a little bit in the video, which is that ideally, I think aspirationally, you should have variant gameplay contextual on the texture of your opening hand, and that those should be similar. You should have similar game plans based on what your opening hand looks like, but it shouldn't be identical. You should be pathing towards the exact same win condition every single game, which is something that I think we're
Xena
starting
literally
to see.
supports no existing archetype. Yeah, in some way it's even worse, right? Because Curious at least was a Lightsworn card. Beatrice at least was a BA card. But this card, it just has no, like, it's just, he is generic stable. Go.
A bit of an over-centralization around. You can hear people talking about this, let's say in the Riftbound context, where the Diana deck's game plan is stabilize, be ahead with Ravenbloom Student potentially, and then ultimately your endgame kind of tool, the way that you win the game, involves using Hui and Ride the Wind. And this is something that they're going to try and do in, 70% plus of games. They're going to be ending the game with some combination of Hui or Ride the Wind, or maybe you're just ahead enough that you're winning without even the Ride the Wind. But
yeah, but like, isn't what we're describing right now just the fact that the deck has a game plan that it tries to execute a majority of the time? Because I do feel like the Diana example I don't quite understand.
It's really consistent, and your game plan is really consistent. And you sometimes have seen that before in games like Magic, where you have archetypes that are planning to draw the game out very long, right? Control decks have historically been built in a way where their deck is like 95% interactions and ways to not lose the game, and then 5% win condition. Think Aetherling, think Nephalia Drownyard, think Sphinx's Revelation or Consecrated Sphinx. These things where your deck is playing like 3 or 4 win conditions. You're going to play them when you have 12 lands in play, and you can hold up 2 or 3 counterspells after you play it. This is fine. This is very different. These are decks that are planning to take the game to a length where you're going to have seen basically your whole deck. So it's not so much an issue of consistency as you are going to have played almost every card in your deck anyway, and you've picked the best win condition from amongst those cards.
Right. I do see the difference. But I wonder how, like, I mean, I guess what we're saying is that we would want like mid-rangey decks that don't plan to drag out the game for forever. We would want those to have like multiple game plans, multiple ways to win in case you don't see the other one. So like you'd have to adapt. If you don't see the Hui in your Diana deck, you have to rely on a different card, right?
But amongst decks that are attempting to play the game at a kind of regular speed and tempo, where you're trying to end the game kind of in the middle ground of game length for your trading card game, I think that you really aspirationally should have variant win conditions and variant paths to those win conditions contextual on your opening hand. So that's my kind of like big broad strokes, what I would like consistency goals to look like. I have a couple of examples here of things that I like.
And we can already see how that idea of consistency doesn't really apply to Yu-Gi-Oh! Because we don't have these types of decks where you drag out the game for so long that you try to find a certain win condition or something. It's just not something that's applicable for Yu-Gi-Oh! Like Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not, even though on the surface level it is, but Yu-Gi-Oh! Is not really a turn-based game anymore, right? Like, and that's fine. This, once again, I don't have an issue with that. But it does make it fundamentally different from all of these mana-based card games where you build up a mana curve over time. Like that just is not how Yu-Gi-Oh! Works.
I think that have done it in an okay way, and then I have obviously already given you examples of things that I think have caused problems in that regard. So one example I already mentioned offhand, but it is the Lunalite archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! I think that this one, while it is always pathing towards Liger Dancer now, as its win condition, I think that the way that you get there is variant enough, contextual based on opening hand, that I think it feels pretty reasonable. It's not a situation where from any one card starter you get to 2 Ligers, for example. It matters a lot what's in your opening hand. Specifically, if you draw like Gold Leo, then yeah, like obviously.
Wouldn't you say the Reiko Tail in a way has multiple win cons, especially when it was the mirror? I mean, I don't have an issue with consistency in Yu-Gi-Oh! That's why I don't like that's why I'm arguing like this is not a problem for Yu-Gi-Oh! In particular. Yu-Gi-Oh! Has problems, believe me, but I don't think this is one of them. But yeah, I still thought I think it's an interesting thing to talk about, and that's the interesting thing here is that I do understand the perspective, right? Like I understand how someone who's coming from other card games, mainly mana-based card games, has this opinion. Like I get it. It's not something I can't understand.
The world is your oyster, and you're likely going to get whatever you want if your opponent doesn't have too much interaction. But if
I also don't know. I don't think Lunalite is
starters in particular. The gameplay is very dynamic along the way to get to what your win condition is, and there are way more games than people realize that end in you only making 1 Liger, or in you potentially having to go on a very different path than you would normally to get to the 2nd Liger. And I think that this is a pretty reasonable one. Another deck that I've played somewhat recently that I kind of liked was the blue-white Oculus Tempo deck in Standard. This has rotated out of Standard at this point, but this was a deck that was attempting to play Abhorrent Oculus along with Haughty Jin.
As an additional cost to cast this spell, exile 6 cards from your grave. Flying. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, manifest Dread. What the hell does that mean? Look at the top 2 cards of your library, put one onto the battlefield as a 2/2, and the other into the grave. That sounds like a cool card. So you're trying to mill something to the graveyard to cast this thing as early as possible. Or what?
And your game plan was kind of twofold. You had a self-mill element, and you were looking to win the game with these
Draw
big
1 mill
flyers.
1. Okay.
But you had a game plan where you could be going for kind of this like cheats plan, where you cheat an Oculus into play, or you had this alternative game plan where you were looking to build up a big graveyard and have these large Haughty Jins that would be
putting keywords just for the sake of keywords. Yeah, I think Magic, I mean, Yu-Gi-Oh! I would love if Yu-Gi-Oh! Had some keywords, but I do think Magic has too many.
Able to punch through when
from an outside perspective.
These games were really interesting because you saw a bunch of your deck, but it went into the graveyard rather than it being in your hand. So you had access to a large amount of resources, but not all of them were super useful.
Oh, you cheated out, okay.
And you really did oftentimes have to decide whether this was an Oculus game or whether this was a Jin game. Were you playing as more of a tempo strategy in this matchup? Are you playing as more of a Reanimator combo deck in this matchup? What was your role based on what your opening hand looked like? I thought this was quite reasonable and quite interesting. And I'll be honest, I think broadly speaking, Magic does a better job of this than most other games. Inherently, the mana system in Magic brings the consistency of decks down to a point that already feels pretty good. But
yeah, I mean, yeah, Magic does a good job of having less consistency, I guess. Yeah. It does a good job at screwing you over sometimes.
In general, I think that there's a decent number of examples recently that have been good in this Magic context as well. Another one that I quite like recently is there's a
dude, the most frustrating thing about Magic's system in terms of the lands is not even, to me, it's not even the having to open a certain number of lands. To me, the most frustrating thing whenever I play Magic is because in Magic you draw 1 card a turn, but usually you play at least 2 a turn because you play a land and you play another card, or like by paying mana for it. You lose cards every turn, right? Magic's usually, unless you play powerful draw spells, the hand size goes down very drastically when you play Magic over like 5, 6, 7 turns. And then like a lot of the time you're down to very few cards in the late game. And then you draw like 2 lands back to back and you just ran out of shit to do. Like you just, and then your opponents draws like on turn 7, they draw a 7-drop or whatever. And it's like, yeah, okay. Well, I mean, I know modern Magic decks, they don't even play 7-drops anymore, but you know what I mean, right? It's like if you're in a situation where you're low on cards and you draw lands, you just draw no cards. You just skip your draw phase for no reason, pretty much.
blue-red tempo deck that's based around elementals. There's a couple of different ways that you can
and
play
I feel
it.
like that's something that isn't even talked about enough with Magic. Is like people always say like, oh, you open too many lands or you open too few lands. I think drawing lands in the late game is also such a bad feeling.
Ones revolves around playing Slickshot Show Off and Eddie Merc Crab as your two main win conditions. And the context of a game in which you are attempting to push through lethal with Slickshot Show Off is very different from a game in which you are attempting to tempo your opponent with Eddie Merc Crab. And contextual based on what your draw looks like, how many show offs you draw versus how many crabs you draw, that's going to massively inform the texture of that game and how that game manifests. So those are a couple examples of decks that I think are pretty reasonable and provide some pretty
Master Duel is up. Okay, we'll be there in a sec.
Game to game. Magic in general, I think, has done a better job of this, especially in its formats that are low.
There's one thing that I think makes this happen for Magic, and I don't think it's the lands. I think the thing that makes this happen for Magic is I think they have less searching. At least from what I'm seeing all the time, like they have some tutors sometimes, but a lot of the times they just don't have searching. It is a matter of you have to play with the cards that you draw. Right, there is card draw, but there's a significantly less amount of like you just find that card, right? And this is the main reason why I think Yu-Gi-Oh games would like this is something I think Yu-Gi-Oh decks could benefit from as well if we just had less bridging and this card searches this, searches this, searches this. In terms of like you just deal with the stuff that you're drawn. The stuff that you draw can still do powerful things, but you just can't always search that one card.
Or on cantrips. Obviously, in Legacy, you have a substantially higher degree of consistency, and I think that has caused problems off and on. The Oops All Spells deck recently was a deck that like clearly had consistency problems, and they made a consistency hit to it by banning Undercity Informer. But in general, I do think that Magic does a bit of a better job of balancing this kind of tension, both by printing things that aren't too similar functionally, but kind of push towards a cohesive plan, and also by just removing some of the issues I've discussed by having a larger deck size, showing you fewer cards in an average game, and as a result, creating, I think, slightly.
I don't know, man. It just sounds like you like Magic. It sounds like you prefer Magic.
What are the tools that I think some of these games could start to lean on more to help these consistency problems in a way that respects that tension that I was just talking about? I think that there are a decent amount of tools that create interesting consistency dialogues, that create choices for players where they need to either make choices at a deck building level or they have to make choices in a gameplay level that are going to ultimately still lead to engaging in dynamic gameplay without necessarily running afoul of games having balance issues based around consistency. Number one is using multi-pip or multicolored systems more actively. This is something that wouldn't work for Yu-Gi-Oh! And Yu-Gi-Oh! That's not really a concept.
I like this guy, but some of his Yu-Gi-Oh! Takes are interesting. I mean, he is new in Yu-Gi-Oh! And I think that's what makes it interesting, because I do like the perspective of someone who's looking at Yu-Gi-Oh! From the perspective of I'm coming from other card games into Yu-Gi-Oh! Because I also really like comparing between different card games, and a lot of people don't do that because they just play one card game mainly.
Though I can retemplate it for Yu-Gi-Oh! After I explain it in a color context. But this is something that I think designers have been increasingly reticent to really do. In Magic, you have broadly seen a kind of reverse creep in terms of the amount of pips that they have been putting on powerful cards. Cards that would have previously had a second colored pip for sure are now a single colored pip and 2 generic mana. It's like the most common casting cost on busted legendary that you think is going to show up in standard in a high play rate or maybe even in modern. That has just become the norm. And I think that by doing so, you are really increasing the number of games that end in a potentially unfun state, because players are more capable of just including all of the best cards in their deck. And obviously this happens in Magic, but this happens in other games as well.
I think their what's it called? Their way of dealing with the mana problem or the land problem is just making less multicolored cards, is what he's saying. Because like that's one other way to get screwed in Magic, is if you have a card that costs blue and red mana, but you only have blue mana. So they're trying to fix it that way a little bit, I guess. But I don't think it helps that much.
Unlimited, fairly infuriatingly, introduced the concept of triple aspect cards at the start of this new rotation. And in my mind, when they introduced that concept, I thought this is such a great choice. It's going to allow them to turn the lever on cards to make sure that they can put powerful effects, either be they units or events, into specifically boxed strategies. And they've just not done that. in practice. While cards like Single Reactor Ignition are boxed into specifically Blue-Red Villainy, which is good, I guess. Like, the best deck in the format is a Blue-Red Villainy deck that doesn't play that card, so that's certainly something. But on top of that, you're just running into this issue where I think that if you look at Ninth Sister and Pre-Vizsla and Chimera, like, surely if we had just gated one of these cards to also be in, say, green or in yellow and kept it out of just being generically powerful and usable together, we would have been able to control the overall power level of the strategy a little bit more. Or even if you didn't want to
Master Duel is up, but staggering logins. Yeah, they did that this morning already. We'll see if it works. We're getting through this video in a second. I'll try to talk less because we've already, like, it's already been over an hour, I think.
And put it into multiple colors. More of these cards need to have a second colored aspect in them. This is something that happened in the very first set. They printed the named events, the aspect names events, so Cunning, Vigilance, Aggression, and...
Hi, Mara, thank you for the 7 months. Appreciate you. Also, Flea, thank you for the 27. Do you prefer Rotas or pod cards? I prefer drawing over searching.
And
I think it's
Command.
cooler.
They printed those 4 events. They were double aspect cards that were exceptionally powerful, and there were whole strategies created around Cunning and Vigilance that players made the conscious choice to play a double color, a double single color, because they got access to these powerful tools. And then seemingly for no reason...
So yes, in a way, I do agree with the fact that I would enjoy Yu-Gi-Oh decks that don't always make the same boards. I would enjoy that. I think like more drawing, less searching, more just play with the cards you have and your extra deck tools. I think that would be more fun. But I think in the modern way that Yu-Gi-Oh is being played right now, I think the way it works makes sense. I think it could be better. And I don't think the consistency itself is the problem. But I would like it if combos were less spreadsheety, less this searches that, summons that, searches this, bridges into that, then you summon this, that searches this, and so on and so forth, right? Like I would like it to be less of that. So this is where I think that this is where I can agree with him on where consistency can be a little bit annoying. Because that thing is ultimately caused by searching and summoning from deck like being very consistent things.
Fantasy Flight decided that's just not a thing we're going to do anymore, and more or less have not printed a double aspect spell or card that has been worth playing almost at all. You know, like there are some examples, some slight examples, like DJ is an example, although you were arguably trying to not play it for its double aspect cost in some metagame states. And overall, what this means is that like you just get to play all the best stuff. You don't have to make deck building choices. And I think that that's something that you could look at as well. Pre-Vizsla is this exceptionally powerful board swing. We know it's something that people are going to be interested in. What if it had just been blue villainy instead of being blue villainy? It seems as though they've kind of defaulted into this decision. And I think that if you added more pips and you use the pips more aggressively, you would be able to box some of these things out and force players to make more concerted choices about how they played them. Similarly, in Riftbound as well, there's probably something to be said about the fact that more pips could be added to some of these powerful effects, although I think that issue is less specifically one there. In the Yu-Gi-Oh context, this is something that people have been asking for forever, but the way that you would template this in Yu-Gi-Oh is to just put more appropriate locks on cards.
Yes.
The really obvious one that everyone kind of asked for was like Havakiri should have a reptile lock. Sure, that's a great one. But just in general, I think there are tons of other things that you can look at where the locks that these cards put in place are not substantial enough to actually force players.
Yeah, but that does the exact opposite, right? That doesn't change consistency. That changes ceiling. So in a way, the solution that we are suggesting for Yu-Gi-Oh is not a consistency change, right?
To make meaningful choices either in deck building or in gameplay. And if you added more restrictions in this way, you would at least mitigate the situation where you would force players to make a trade-off between a highly consistent deck and a very high ceiling deck.
Right? Yeah. I mean, I agree with this 100%. I just think that like this is why Yu-Gi-Oh is different from the other games, is because in Yu-Gi-Oh you need different solutions and they are not targeted at consistency.
Next, this is another system level one, but it's deck size. And broadly speaking, I think that games are trending towards having smaller deck sizes, and it is in part due to these consistency restrictions,
this
and
is
it is in part
interesting.
because you're not putting resources in the decks anymore, like in Magic. So you want to make sure that you're keeping...
Would Yu-Gi-Oh be more interesting if you were forced to play 50 or 60 cards? Because then you're not going to draw specific non-engine as often. You can't draw specific starters as often. The way you build decks would probably change. I would just be a little afraid that with how modern Yu-Gi-Oh is currently, like I'm just thinking like how do 60 card decks work in Yu-Gi-Oh right now? And because we have all the bridges and we don't have sufficient locks, there would be a lot of combo slop happening as a result, right? Like people would just play more slop and you would be less likely to draw the right cards against it. So I think it wouldn't work. I think it would not work in Yu-Gi-Oh! With the way the cards are right now. You would have to restructure it significantly. Because the thing is, like, the thing that holds 60 cards combo piles back at the moment is the fact that there are more consistent 40 card decks out there that will draw punishes like a Molcharmy more consistently, and you are not as likely to draw your Ash for the Molcharmy because you're playing 60, right? So if you just remove the 40 card decks from the equation, I think the 60 card combo piles would be maybe like, but then once again, you could think it through and you could say like, okay, once that's the case, we then tone down the power level of the 60 card combo decks and then we'd be fine. It could be interesting.
Like a somewhat similar ratio. You don't want people to have like 15 or even more, right? You'd have to have like almost 23 ofs in order to fill out a full 60 card deck, and designers are moving away from that as a design paradigm. I kind of wouldn't do that. I think I would say let's make people play.
Did we check last regionals result already? There were a lot of Chaos, Mitsu, Azamina, Yami, whatever piles. I mean, this is gonna keep happening until they do something about the cards that enable this. Yes.
60 card decks and increase the variance a little bit, make sure that we print enough cards that allow people to still have consistent curves if we're going to offer them consistent mana curves through our other systems in the game. But 40 cards with 3 ofs is, I think, offering a level of consistency that makes games begin to start to play the same across a metagame. You begin to be able to map out exact paths of games based on.
I think this is reducing. This is a very this is a look on Yu-Gi-Oh! That I don't think is entirely accurate, because it's reducing Yu-Gi-Oh! Down to the turn 1 of the player going first, right? It's like ignoring all the things that happen after, when in reality, like I said earlier, I think the majority of good Yu-Gi-Oh! Is happening after turn 1. Turn 1 is the thing that we all just sit there and wait for it to end, and then we start playing the game after you're done setting up, right? Like that's where it becomes interesting in modern Yu-Gi-Oh! And like that, if you accept that that is what Yu-Gi-Oh! Is, then I think it becomes much easier to look past it and say like, okay, it actually is an interesting game. There is a lot of good Yu-Gi-Oh! To be played for when the player going second plays into a board, as long as that board is reasonable. And then it doesn't matter that the combo is the same every time. Like, yeah, let him do the thing, and then we'll start playing and see if we can break it, as long as it's breakable.
What your opening looks like, and your openings are going to look similar enough due to deck sizes and the limited on number of cards in your deck that you can have, that I think that this is something that we could look at as well. Even something like, if you want to play 40 cards, let people only play 2 of something. I think a really interesting dynamic in Hearthstone specifically around this 2 of system. Obviously 30 cards 2 of and 60 card 4 of is basically the same math wise, but in terms of your odds to draw 1. But there is an interesting dynamic that happens in Hearthstone, where once you play 1 of an effect, you are much less likely to draw the second one, and you also will only get 1 more of those things. There's more tension around that, more tension around potentially losing it in some way. And so part of me wonders too if fewer copies of cards would be better for providing this variant gameplay based on the texture of your opening hand, because you would force people to have more diverse opening hands simply by the number of cards available to them in their deck. Something that I would like to see, this is more specific to Yu-Gi-Oh! I would love to lock specific endboard pieces behind specific starters more aggressively, and this requires architecting entire archetypes differently, right? But for me, I would much prefer if the Cool Tune archetype was structured in a way where if you did not start on the right name, you didn't have a path to RS, or maybe there were 2 names that you could start on that give you a path to RS, whereas in practice, you could just get to it from anywhere. And so that's something that I would love to see. I think that it would be...
That's an interesting concept for an archetype, where like if you don't start with Mix, you just can't make Remix. If you don't start with Rico, you can't make RS, but you have other options. I could see that.
More interesting in that it would give you...
It'd be interesting. It would actually, that would be interesting, because then it would be like, well, if they have this starter, they will end on this monster. If they have another starter, they are forced to... They still have a play, but they are forced to go a different route, and that ends on a different monster. So it's a different kind of game depending on what starter they open. I think that's an interesting take.
Interesting decisions about how you sequence your turn and which starter you start with, if starting with something in particular was locking you out of something else down the line. And then the last thing that I think, this is a more holistic thing, is when looking at designs, I think that it's important to attempt to systematically ensure that decks that are attempting to attain higher ceilings at the cost of consistency can reach a ceiling that is high enough to justify taking that risk. And that's another problem that you see manifesting fairly frequently. In something like Riftbound, there are not really traditional ramp decks. And the reason is that playing Aurora and just consistently playing Aurora on 9 is better than just playing ramp spells and trying to hardcast dragons out of your hand and drawing them. And the reason for this is that technically the ceiling on these other ramp decks is a little bit higher. If you can get the perfect curve with dragons, you are probably going to...
I think the problem is that Aurora is broken and shouldn't exist.
...end up with a stronger endgame than the Aurora player. The problem is the difference is not that big. The ceiling on like a red-orange dragons deck and the ceiling on a purple-orange Aurora deck are like, you know, if the dragons are here, the Aurora deck is here. It's not big. It's a very, very small gap. And the trade-off is the Aurora deck is vastly, vastly more consistent. And so I think it's important to find ways in design to reward players for taking risks in a way that gets to pay off those choices. A card like Renekton in Riftbound's newest set is one that I kind of like in this regard, where I think theoretically this is the right design direction to go, where you can say to players, hey, you can sacrifice a bunch of your resources to play a head-on curve, and if you draw the right texture of your opening hand, that's going to be especially good. And I think that that's not in a situation where like your endgame ceiling is higher than other decks, but your early game ceiling is so much higher than other decks that maybe that trade-off becomes worth it. In general, it's just something that I think designers need to be aware of. They need to be aware of the fact that...
New overframe revealed? Wait, is it the last one from the utility selection? Ooh, is it that? Oh, it is. Oh, I'm excited for that. We'll look at that in a second.
You can't just allow the most consistent strategy to be close to the high rolling strategy. There should be some amount of give and take and some amount of decision-making process behind that, where the people who are choosing to play a higher consistency strategy are accepting that they are likely playing at a lower power level. I think something that you could look at here is maybe by making cantrips more expensive in your game, by forcing players to invest significant tempo and resources into selecting. You can punish them more appropriately for doing so.
This would be something, if I had to coin this to Yu-Gi-Oh, it would be if you had two archetypes, like I said earlier, that could go together, but you actually have to draw both of them. You can't just easily bridge. That is a risk that you take in deck building, right? Do I take out a significant portion of my non-engine to fit a second engine to make the ceiling of my deck higher? And do I want to make that trade-off? Like, for example, in the current format, like a Mitsurugi, Azamina, Chaos Ritual pile, whatever. Like, you know, that deck does sacrifice for whatever it's worth. There are some bridges in there, and I don't like it. But if that deck didn't have bridges, maybe it would still be playable, and you would just have some very synergistic, strong cards in there that, you know, make for a very high ceiling deck. And I think if there were no bridges, that would be an interesting concept, because you'd be like, okay, I'll sacrifice some level of consistency, I'll sacrifice some non-engine to play a 60 card, very high ceiling engine pile. And that could be an interesting trade-off. Like, if all of the combo decks were like that, I'd be happy about it. Or happier.
Certainly stack deck costing 1, for example, like, is a joke. Like, it's an embarrassing joke. That is such a low opportunity cost for such a drastic increase in consistency that it doesn't really work. But if that same card...
We're seriously watching this for an hour and 30 minutes? Yeah, that, because it's interesting. What do you mean?
Card was 2, or...
It's yes, it's a 45-minute video. I need to add something to the discussion. Why would I react to it?
Like, something like 1 and a rune, and there was actual tension behind playing your cantrip versus developing the board versus using your resources for something that doesn't end up consuming a rune. That would ultimately end up creating much more dynamic games and much more dynamic decision making, in my opinion, than if you create the situation where including the cantrips feels very, very free, and as a result getting access to this consistency comes at not that much of a loss of ceiling. So that's it. That's, I think, those are the tools that I would look at, things that you could change. If you have other ideas for creating interesting consistency like issues, I would be all for it. I know, for example, like Yu-Gi-Oh uses the limited and semi-limited list to just consistency hit decks sometimes and say you're going to be less likely to draw this starter. And while that works, it also means that, like, when they do draw the starter, you just want to roll out of your chair. I mean, anyone who's played against Malice in the last, who played against Malice, kind of like as it was slowly tanking bans, would tell you that, like, they always just have the March Hare anyway. So why?
Okay, it's not the March Hare in particular, but you're on the right track. This is the exact point of why it doesn't work in Yu-Gi-Oh! Why it's not an appropriate solution, because it just creates more frustration for both sides. It just creates more frustration of oh, I didn't draw a starter, so I just can't play the game, or my opponent drew the starter and they're doing the exact same thing as before the balance change. It just doesn't make sense. The only way it works is you have to hit the ceiling of decks, you have to properly balance from the get-go, and if you fail to balance from the get-go in Yu-Gi-Oh, you have to be more aggressive about changing the ceiling. Something like banning one of the Malice Link monsters, which is not a consistency hit at all, that meaningfully changes how the deck plays. That's good.
Why do you care? Like, you're gonna get got. They're gonna find their way to the one of no matter what. So that's not necessarily, I think, the best tool, just arbitrarily limiting consistency. I think that there's got to be a kind of check and balance, and it's got to be done both at a systemic level and at an individual card design level. But yeah, I thought this was a really interesting topic. It's definitely something that's going to continue to come up, like I mentioned, because the design trends are headed so much in this kind of direction. It's definitely going to be something that comes up as we continue to see more trading card games get produced. As we
You have to put Subway Surfer in the corner. Dude, one of my opponents at the European Championship, when we sat down before the round, they made an announcement, and it took a while before the round started, and they started playing Subway Surfer because they yeah. And I kid you not, it was the Malice player I played in like round 3 or round 4.
See more kind of,
and then they shifted me.
First, take this on. So I will be very intrigued to see what people do. There are definitely some decisions being made in that regard. Like, for example, the Cyberpunk TCG, you don't know what legend you're going to reveal when you go and call a legend. I actually think that's a pretty interesting system where you get access to these consistency tools. Kind of, you still have kind of a 1 in 3 chance about which one you're going to hit when, so you don't get access to these really powerful on curve effects on every single game. I think that's quite dynamic and interesting, and I think more of that kind of design is going to be necessary to kind of walk us back from this hyper consistent space we're in right now. But yeah, that's all
Okay,
that's all I got for the
interesting discussion. I really enjoyed that. I'm still looking forward to making a video together with Elsie. We've been talking about that. We've been wanting to make that happen. I'm sure we'll do it soon.